1 in 5 new moms and 1 in 10 new dads struggle with perinatal mental health challenges. We also know that 75% of those cases go untreated. If you're not well recovered, adding 20 to 50 hours of work back into your week is not going to help your recovery go any better.
Welcome back to the BeHerVillage Podcast. I'm your host, Kaitlin McGrayus. I'm a doula, mother of 3, and the founder of BeHerVillage, a gift registry that helps moms get the support they need as they welcome their babies. Today, I'm continuing my conversation with the amazing Jackie Cook. She is the owner of Poppins, and she helps both employers and employees get the most out of maternity leave. Today, we're continuing our conversation and talking about how you set boundaries and take a real maternity leave, a real restful maternity leave, why it's important and how to do it. She gives a rundown of exactly what you do to get actual real time off of work, no matter what your role is, so that you can have a restful, wonderful maternity leave with lots of baby snuggles, lots of recovery, and go back to work feeling whole and feeling like the best version of yourself. I guess I would love for you to talk about how recovering well impacts your return to work. Like, is that part of the equation that if we work through the leave, are we then showing up with an empty cup?
Yes, I think that is so important. And I think having a protected maternity leave in terms of you as the new parent have been able to define the parameters for yourself for your leave. I think that is what I really advocate for. That's so then it's I have decided that 1 hour a week I'm going to check in and clear out my email because that makes me feel a little more calm. It keeps me up to date. Then I don't feel like I'm going to come back in 12 weeks to a shitstorm of 4,000 emails and a whole bunch of crises that I, maybe didn't need to be involved in, but I could have cleared out or I could have kept moving. That's a lot different than a company or your boss saying, oh no, you have to work during your maternity leave. I'm very much against that happening. So I think that's the prep that can happen in advance. Having those parameters in place then allows that recovery during leave. And so to get to your question on how does that impact the return? So we know 1 in 5 new moms and 1 in 10 new dads struggle with perinatal mental health challenges. That's a lot, right?
That's
1 in
a
5 new
lot.
moms are
And
struggling with.
people rarely even think about the dads or the partners. So
Yeah,
that's included is appreciated, but also sort of also very alarming because
it's a
I
lot,
don't think that's
and I think there are a lot of mental health therapists that could speak to this much better than I can, but it manifests different in dads. It comes up later. It's sort of the domino effect of maybe they've been holding it together. They've been holding everything together at home for a few months. And now on month 3, month 5, it starts to manifest. With new moms, we know that's usually in the first couple weeks that postpartum anxiety, that postpartum depression really start to manifest and take over. We also know that 75% of those cases go untreated. So 75% of those 1 in 5 moms don't get treatment for the mental health challenge that they're struggling through for a variety of reasons. But think about if you are that person, and I know we are both postpartum anxiety recoverers, and I feel very lucky that mine was identified. My pediatrician at week 2 did a screening and looked me in the eye and asked me, how are you? And I burst into tears and, fell apart in the pediatric office. But because that happened, she gave me a list of therapists in our area that focused on postpartum and had availability. So I walked out of that office with a list of 5 phone numbers I could call to get an appointment. And that allowed me to go to therapy during my maternity leave, which meant that when I went back to work, I was in a better headspace. Literally, my head was in a better space.
right.
I had some tools to manage when my emotions took over, when my racing thoughts took over. And that actually allowed me to then refocus on my team at work, the projects. I was able to come back with a bit of fresh perspective because I'd been gone for 12 weeks. So there were certain things that before my maternity leave at work felt like a big challenge or really important. And then I came back 12 weeks later and my perspective had shifted. I could take kind of a fresh look at things. And we were able to actually move certain things on our team forward in a different way because I'd taken a step back and come back in. But I don't think that would have happened if I hadn't gotten the help from a mental health standpoint. I don't think I would have been able to do that. Even with that, I was still sleep deprived and tired. And that takes a toll. So specifically for birthing people, I think if we're looking at recovering from a childbirth experience, if you're not well recovered, adding 20 to 50 hours of work back into your week is not going to help your recovery go any better. Right. You're not going to suddenly be like, oh, I've been putting off pelvic floor therapy, but now that I've added 40 hours of work back in, I'm going to start doing that.
I love how you phrase that because it can be something we can like trick ourselves into, is that somehow will help. But really, when you phrase it like that, no, of course that's not going to help. And it underlines the importance of using that maternity leave almost with a goal, which is to be ready to go back to work at the end of it, right? And we can center that as a goal if we need to, as this anchor point of like, okay, I have 12 weeks, I have 16 weeks, I have whatever it is, sometimes 6 weeks, and I can get to a place where I can return and all you've actively used the leave to address the issues. It's some of it is time and snuggling with your baby. Of course, there's going to be endless snuggling regardless, but it also is pelvic floor issues, mental health issues, taking, the time for postpartum appointments, for lactation visits, for setting up childcare. I mean, there's actually a lot to do in that time.
There's a lot to do. Exactly. And some of that you can do in advance by sort of having that list. I think BeHerVillage is a great tool for that. Just to give you a plug, Kaitlin, I think for an expecting mom to be able to pre-screen some of those services and have cash in hand, it doesn't mean you have to use all those things, but it means that you've already sort of thought through, if I need mental health support, who can I call? Eliminating some of that searching and figuring out how you're going to fund it, that takes some of the crisis out of the picture in the moment so that you can hopefully just address the issue you're having. And in 6 to 12 weeks, will you solve everything going on in your family and suddenly have a glorious relationship with your sister-in-law or your mother or whatever? No, like this is not a fairy tale, but I think a little bit of preparation goes a long way to then be able to thrive and enjoy those newborn snuggles to the max.
I love that. So let's talk about, I feel like we've sort of danced around it, but I would love to talk about how to actually draw boundaries with your work in a way that feels healthy. And I'm so appreciative of this new perspective for myself of it's not all or nothing. It's not I'm going off grid for 16 weeks. See you. Although it could be if that's what some people prefer. That I've heard stories of like, well, I came back from maternity leave and I just went into my inbox and I deleted the 2,000 emails I had because they didn't need me. They survived for this long, right? Like starting fresh. That's
super empowering.
Right. That's an approach.
All feels great. Yeah.
For sure. But I wonder how people can sort of like identify their own comfort, especially people who haven't been there before, who have never stepped away from work. For many of us, that first baby, that first leave is the first time we have not worked since we started working. How do you navigate that?
Yeah. So I work with my clients to first take a look at what's all the stuff that you're doing based on your job and how does that line up with your anticipated maternity leave. Our goal is let's look 2 to 4 weeks before your due date and pencil that in as everything must be ready by then. And then if your baby comes 2 weeks late, you've got a few weeks of being a lame duck or watching Netflix maybe, or doing those projects that you never have time to get to. But the goal is get everything ready at least a couple weeks before that due date. And that can vary by job role. So if you're a teacher and your baby is due in May, well, it might be very simple to say, I need to just talk to my administrator. They're going to get a sub in for the last 6 weeks of school, and then I'm going to enjoy my summer break and I'll start back up in the fall school year. That's a very clean, easy prep. And we see that similarly with roles like nursing or jobs where you're kind of on the schedule or off the schedule. So then it's more about figuring out when I'm off the schedule and making sure that that's very clear. And then having some conversation about what does the coming back on the schedule look like? Are there options to come back maybe 2 or 3 days a week instead of 5? Are there options to shift my schedule so that I can do daycare pickup? Those types of conversations, if you're able to have those before you start your maternity leave, that's going to give your employer an opportunity to actually make it happen for you. Wow. It doesn't mean you shouldn't have that conversation when it's important. So if you don't think about it until 2 days before you go back, it's still worth asking if you can ramp back in and have sort of a gradual return. For roles that are more fluid, more constant, more meeting heavy, things like tech and professional roles and marketing and sales types of roles. For those, I really recommend first just take a look at everything that you're doing in about a month. So look at your schedule for a whole month and actually do the exercise of writing down everything you do and what's that frequency. So there's some things that you do every day. There's some things that you might do once a week. There might be a monthly report you put out or a quarterly something that you're responsible for. So get all of that on paper first, or virtual paper. And then from there, you can start to think about what are the things that maybe can just go away forever. Like maybe there's a meeting you've been having for 2 years and no one's canceled it because it's just a recurring meeting. But this is an opportunity to look at it and say, could we just cancel it? And if anyone misses it, we'll put it back on the calendar in 3 months. No one ever misses it, right? So that's one opportunity, is just like get rid of stuff altogether. And that feels like spring cleaning.
I was going to say, it almost feels like decluttering, like the nesting that you do at home where you're like, oh, I don't need all this stuff. And that feeling is your house feels lighter. Everything feels good. You're getting rid of things you're not using so you can use the things you have better. It's like doing that with your schedule or your work tasks.
Exactly. Yeah, do that at work. And if you can do that 2 to 3 months before you're out, then you have a chance for people to pipe up and complain if it needs to come back in.
Right.
But a lot of times people are very happy to release those types of things. So that's kind of the first layer. And then the second layer is figuring out who could cover these things. How intense is it? Does it need to be something that just I tell Kaitlin that she needs to keep an eye out in case something comes up? Or is it that I need Kaitlin to actively do this work while I'm gone? So thinking through some of that for different responsibilities. And depending on your role, that might be something that you take autonomous control over, or it might be something that you work with a manager or supervisor on as a partnership. But I think the more that as the expecting parent, you can be involved in that, then you have a good sense of how in control you are, how the prepping the backup so that you know what they need. You can start having your backup for different activities take the lead before you're out, so that you can shadow them, give feedback if needed, really raise their confidence. In addition to decluttering, I think maternity leave is also a great opportunity to do some project or role transition. So if there's someone that you work with that might be better suited to doing some of the work you're doing, why not use that as an opportunity? And when you come back to work, you might be able to pick up a new project or something a little different that you've been wanting to try, but you didn't have the time for.
Mm.
So from a tactical standpoint, kind of just going through all the stuff is really a big part of that maternity leave planning. Um, and as part of that, I work with clients to frame the conversation around when or if I'll be contacted on maternity leave and by
Right.
who.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
that's really, I think,
That
one of
feels
the
like the
exit
big
criteria.
thing. Yeah, because it's like it's one thing for you to go check your email, but it's another thing for you to be really deep into your leave and doing all of these self-care and learning how to parent and just existing in that moment, trying to recover yourself to be able to get back to work and to be interrupted. So how do you manage that? And how do you communicate that before you leave so that you don't sort of have to have a confrontation while
Yeah,
you're actually already on leave?
I think it's variable by job and job culture. Um, I can share from my two maternity leaves personally. Um, in the first, I had a couple big projects that my timing was terrible for my first baby. Like I thought it was going to take us a lot longer to get pregnant than it did,
Mm.
which is, I understand, a really wonderful problem to have. But the timing was awful. Our baby was due like a month before a huge project, like a 2-year project that I was the lead for.
Wow.
And so when I went to tell my boss that I was pregnant, I was terrified because I was thinking, boy, in his shoes, I'd be pissed that
Right.
like Jackie's not going to be doing this thing that like it's basically her job. Um, and instead, my boss said, congratulations, that's
Mm.
awesome. He was very supportive. He said the right things and was legitimately very excited and supportive. But in that case, we identified who was going to be on point really early, and
Mm.
I was copying that person in for months before I went out. But I knew if something happens with this client, then Jeff will call me.
Mm.
It won't be Jeff plus the other 20 people on the project team calling me about random things. Everyone goes to Jeff.
Right.
And then if there's something that I didn't transition well or I didn't get the info he needed over and he needs more background, then Jeff will text me and we'll arrange a time that day to connect.
Wow.
And that was what we had worked out and Jeff never called me.
That
Um,
doesn't surprise me, but it
yeah,
also is I love that boundary of like there's one person who can contact me and
yeah,
building that relationship and that partnership with them, which is an interesting exercise all on its own, right? To share the leadership and to have to loop somebody in, especially right at the end, it sounds like, of a really long project. And
mhm.
then to not have him contact you, it's almost like signifies what a great job you did in your efforts to get yourself onto maternity leave.
Yeah. Well, maybe, or maybe Jeff was just a really great guy and he was like, under no circumstances will I bother Jackie while she's with her baby. I think that could also be true.
Yeah.
Um, Second time around, I think different job, slightly different situation, but I sort of had a lieutenant who was everyone went to that person. And then if there was something that she didn't feel she could manage, she would go to my boss. And if they couldn't figure it out, then they would get a hold of me. And in that job, they were both people I worked with really closely. And so probably once or twice a week, we would text each other. It was something that I didn't feel like I wanted them to not contact me.
Hmm.
And so I would check in and just say, hey, here's a picture of my cute baby. Is everything okay? And they'd respond and say, your baby's super cute. And yeah, we're good. And I think once or twice during those 12 weeks, they had kind of a quick question about something. But in both cases, it was something that I had the knowledge of. I didn't have to dive into my computer or find a file. I just needed to sort of say, like, oh, yeah, you have to call Aaron about that or something.
Right.
Um, so that was how I managed it. I think, again, it really depends on what your job is and who your boss is and what that culture is. But in general, I think working with your supervisor to define who can call me and under what circumstances do I want to be communicated with? Otherwise, leave me alone.
Mm.
is important. There are certainly jobs where it's very inappropriate for an employer to get a hold of someone who is on their maternity leave. And that's something that I work with employers to try to define in their policy guides and make sure they're really clear about. But as an expecting mom, if you're planning on returning to work and you've invested a lot in your career and you at least plan to continue to invest in your professional life,
Mm-hmm.
then getting used to having those conversations before you have your baby is really useful because you keep having them after you go back to work when you do have a baby.
Thank you so much for listening to this conversation. Next week, I have Jackie back for the final part of our conversation where we talk about what it looks like to return to work. Jackie gives actionable tips, steps for how to prepare, how to plan to go from maternity leave back into your full-time role. It's not easy. So many of us are navigating it. And Jackie is exactly the person that I wanted to talk to about this because this is what she does day in and day out. She helps companies and she helps employees at those companies figure out the best way to ramp yourself back in a way that feels good for everyone. If you enjoyed this conversation, please leave us a 5-star review. It really helps us reach more parents. Also, whichever app that you're on, hit follow, hit subscribe so you never miss an episode. Thank you so much for listening. Catch you next time.